All right, so um, today we're diving into something pretty fascinating. This whole phenomenon surrounding Alexander Hamilton, not just the man himself, but like the myth, the musical,
Hmm.
and really how it's changing how we understand history, you know?
Yeah, it really is remarkable how like one musical can re-energize interest in a historical figure, even someone as well known as Hamilton.
Right. It's like he's gone viral like centuries after his death.
Yeah.
So we've got this really interesting source to help us unpack all of this.
Okay.
It's an interview with Professor Renee Romano. She's a historian, and she co-edited this book, Historians on Hamilton, How a Blockbuster Musical is Restaging America's Past.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So our mission today is to kind of unpack how Hamilton the musical has, impacted the legacy of this founding father.
Okay.
Like, is it really turning history on its head, as some people claim?
Hmm.
Or is it kind of reinforcing like a traditional American narrative, albeit through a captivating new lens? So, Professor Romano, she points out some pretty staggering numbers to highlight Hamilton's success, right?
Yeah.
11 Tony Awards,
Wow.
a Grammy, a Pulitzer Prize.
And that's not all.
And that's just the beginning, right?
Yeah.
We're talking record-breaking box office numbers, millions of viewers on Disney Plus touring productions all over the world.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
It's truly a global phenomenon at this point.
It is. I mean, it's really everywhere, and it's like it's seeped into pop culture too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Professor Romano mentions even seeing like middle schoolers in rural Ohio singing, Hamilton songs.
Wow, that's far from Broadway.
Yeah. It's not just a show. It's really like a cultural touchstone. We're seeing Hamilton-themed birthday parties, weddings.
Yeah.
People are even naming their babies after the characters.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. So it's really become a part of like the American fabric.
It has.
So Professor Romano, she argues that part of this appeal is the masterful storytelling of the show. It uses those familiar tropes that we see in a lot of musicals and stories, like the "I Want" song,
Mm-hmm.
which in this case is "My Shot," of course,
Of course.
and the central rivalry, between Burr and Hamilton.
Yeah, yeah. I think those elements really tap into something universal, right? Like our desires for ambition and success. I mean, they're making 18th century politics like relatable to a modern audience.
Right. It's pretty incredible. But where I think it gets really interesting is how Hamilton tackles representation.
Okay. Yeah.
So, they very deliberately chose to cast actors of color as the founding fathers,
Right.
which like visually challenges that traditional image that we have of this period in American history.
Yeah, definitely.
Well,
So it's kind of broadening the picture of who gets to be a part of that American story, right?
Right. So it's broadening it. But Professor Romano also points out that it's limited in its representation.
Okay.
So how so?
Well, while it gives actors of color ownership of this, traditionally white narrative, it doesn't necessarily go deep into their own stories. For instance, it touches on slavery, but it focuses primarily on the South and figures like Jefferson.
So it's not really like exploring the complexities of slavery in the North or even the experiences of people of color in that era.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like opening a door to a more inclusive telling of American history,
Yeah.
but not really stepping through it all the way.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. It makes me wonder if the creators maybe missed an opportunity to tell a more like radical story,
Uh-huh.
like one that actually centered those perspectives. What could they have done differently based on Professor Romano's, insights?
That's a great question, and it's one that historians and artists I think are continuing to grapple with. Like, how do you tell a more like complete and inclusive story
Right.
without like shying away from the difficult parts?
Yeah.
You know? But I mean, we can't forget that, this casting choice has had a significant like positive impact for actors of color
Oh, for sure.
in terms of career opportunities and profit sharing with the original cast,
Absolutely.
That's definitely something to celebrate.
For sure. For sure. And it raises these interesting questions about historical accuracy, too.
Yeah.
So the interview points out some inaccuracies in the musical, like the lyric, "We're a bunch of revolutionary managed abolitionists."
Right.
Professor Romano points out that, while Hamilton was involved in the manumission movement,
Mm-hmm.
he wasn't an abolitionist
Right.
in the true sense of the
Yeah,
word.
that's a good point.
So
Yeah.
it's not, fully accurate. And this ties into a larger point that Professor Romano makes, which is that America kind of has this tendency to simplify or even avoid confronting the full legacy of slavery,
Hmm.
especially in the North. So we have this incredibly popular musical that's, ignited so much discussion, so much excitement, but it's also raising these crucial questions about like historical accuracy
Right.
and the complexities of representation.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds us that even the most like captivating historical narratives deserve like critical analysis.
Right.
How we remember and reinterpret the past is constantly evolving, right? And I think Hamilton is a really powerful example of that process.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder how all of this impacts Hamilton's own legacy,
Hmm.
and because the musical portrays him almost like heroically.
Yeah.
But Professor Romano also reminds us of his like elitist views and his political ambitions.
Mm.
It's like we're getting this very like specific version of the man.
Yeah. It's interesting how Professor Romano calls it the stock value of historical figures, which I think is such
Interesting.
an apt analogy how our perception of these facts just kind of like rises and falls over time.
Yeah.
But she compares Hamilton to Jefferson, whose popularity has kind of declined,
Yeah.
as his role as an enslaver has come under more and more scrutiny.
So context really matters here. And Hamilton's like ambiguity on slavery, while problematic, ironically, it kind of makes him easier to celebrate right now.
Absolutely. I think it speaks to the complexities of grappling with history
Mm.
and how present day values can influence how we interpret the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you think Hamilton plays into all of that?
Well, despite its flaws, I think Hamilton offers like some really valuable lessons about historical thinking itself.
Oh, interesting. So how does like a Broadway musical help us think like historians?
Well, one example Professor Romano highlights is the scene where Eliza burns all of her letters,
Right.
in the song Burn.
Oh, yeah. Such a powerful moment.
It is. And it shows how historical narratives can be like shaped or even silenced. What we don't have access to can be just as important as what we do have.
That's such a good point.
Yeah, Professor Romano uses that scene to really point out that the historical record, it's often incomplete. It's always subject to interpretation.
Right.
We have to be like critical consumers of history, always considering who's telling the story and what might be missing.
It's like Hamilton is throwing open the doors of history and being like, come on in, but be ready to like think critically about what you see.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is what we're all about here on the deep dive, right?
Yeah.
It's about questioning assumptions,
Yeah.
seeking multiple perspectives, recognizing that history is a dialogue, not just like a static set of facts.
Exactly. And Professor Romano argues that by making history so engaging and accessible, Hamilton really ignites a passion for digging deeper. She sees it as like a gateway to further exploration, which is incredibly valuable.
Especially timely with the upcoming semi-quincentennial of the United States.
Oh, right. Yeah.
We're at such a critical point where telling a more inclusive and accurate American story is paramount.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder what other stories deserve to be told on a national stage,
Right.
And how can we make sure that those stories represent like a broader range of perspectives?
So Professor Romano shared this great anecdote about Utah legislators from opposite sides of the political spectrum.
Okay.
They co-sponsored legislation to encourage the use of Hamilton in schools.
Wow.
And get this, they even dressed up as King George and Alexander Hamilton to promote it.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of heartwarming. It's a great example of how Hamilton has managed to like transcend those political divides, at least for a little bit.
Yeah, it shows the power of art, right?
Yeah.
To like bridge those gaps and start meaningful conversations, especially in a political climate that can be so polarized.
Right. And also speaks to the ambiguity of the musical itself.
Yeah.
Hamilton can be interpreted in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Like conservatives might see it as a celebration of individual achievement, right? The power of hard work.
Right.
While liberals might focus more on, the themes of immigration and the contributions of diverse individuals to the American story.
Right. So it's really open to interpretation.
It is. That's part of what makes it so compelling. It invites us to engage with history on our own terms and to kind of like draw our own conclusions.
Mm.
But I think as Professor Romano emphasizes, it's not about accepting Hamilton as the definitive version of history, right? It's about using it as like a springboard for deeper exploration and critical thinking.
And speaking of deeper exploration, Professor Romano points out that Hamilton actually like uses primary sources,
Oh, interesting.
just like historians rely on.
Yeah.
Think about that, a Broadway musical, prompting people to seek out the Federalist Papers.
I know, it's pretty amazing. The interview even mentions that Ron Chernow's biography of Hamilton, which is a pretty dense read,
Yeah.
saw this massive spike in sales after the musical came out.
Wow.
It's like the power of storytelling sparking that curiosity and then a deeper engagement with history.
It really challenges this notion that people just aren't interested in the past.
Right.
Maybe they just haven't found like the right way in yet.
Yeah.
Hamilton proves that if you present history in a way that's compelling, relatable, people will show up for it.
They will. They will. And speaking of engaging with history, I think it's worth mentioning our own involvement with National History Day.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, such an incredible organization that really empowers students to become historians themselves.
It is.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. And it aligns so well with what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Encouraging people, especially young people, to approach history with that critical and curious mind.
Absolutely.
And with the 250th anniversary of the United States coming up so quickly,
Right.
the lessons that we can glean from Hamilton and these conversations that it sparked, they feel especially relevant.
They do. It's a huge opportunity, this semi-quincentennial, to really reflect on our past, you know, both the triumphs and the struggles.
Right.
And to try to envision a future that's informed by a more inclusive and accurate understanding of our history.
Professor Romano believes that America as a nation hasn't fully grappled with its past yet in a way that's both honest and unifying.
Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it?
It is. It's a big challenge to kind of reconcile those complexities of our history
Right.
with the ideals that we aspire to as a nation.
Yeah, it is. But I think Professor Romano sees Hamilton as like a valuable step in the right direction, even if it doesn't get everything right.
Right.
You know, it's started these vital conversations about race, representation, historical accuracy.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that the American story belongs to all of us, you know, not just the select few.
That's such an important point. It's about recognizing those contributions of diverse voices and experiences.
Yeah.
And making sure that those voices are heard, not just on a Broadway stage, but in our classrooms, our communities, our national dialogue.
Right, exactly. And that, I think, is the key takeaway here for you, the listener. Hamilton is a catalyst. It's an invitation to really dive deep into this rich tapestry of American history. It's a reminder that history isn't static, you know?
Right.
It's a dynamic conversation that we're all a part of.
And so what stories do you think deserve to be told on that national stage?
Yeah.
What perspectives are we missing?
Yeah, what are we missing from our understanding of the American narrative?
How can we ensure that the history we create for the future is one that is inclusive, honest, truly representative of all the diverse experiences that have shaped this nation?
Keep those questions in mind as you continue your own exploration of the past. You know, whether you're inspired to see Hamilton, to read Ron Chernow's book, or to research another historical figure that just speaks to you, remember that history is a journey. It's a journey of discovery.
And like any good deep dive,
Exactly.
it's not just about absorbing information.
Right.
It's about sparking that lifelong passion for understanding the world in all its complexity.